And I am Dr. John Mason. I am the main facilitator of Masters of the Journey. And tonight I'm getting a chance to interview Royce Williams. And he lives in Santa Rosa, California. I say that because I used to live in Santa Rosa, and it's a beautiful spot. I came across Royce while we were both traveling. We were on a ship cruising in the Eastern Mediterranean. It was very surprising for me to meet a really wonderful, compatible, interesting person who came up with some amazing stuff that we're going to talk about tonight under those circumstances. And you have to go 10,000 miles to find really interesting people sometimes. So first off, I just want to say hi, Royce, and I'm glad that you're here. Would you like to say hi to the group?
Hello, John. It's nice to meet you or meet you again. As you mentioned, we did meet so far away, and the fact that you used to live in Santa Rosa is heightened by the fact that I used to live in the Pacific Northwest. The scene behind you is where I grew up on Orcas Island, and I think it's yet another sign of that cosmic connection when the ley lines all triangulate and we end up on the same ship on the other side of the planet.
You know, that's going to be the subject of probably another interview because it's strange the way people connect. Now, what people don't realize is that we had a conversation when we were on the ship, and we were talking about ourselves and our backgrounds, and I mentioned that I was doing this kind of weird spiritual consciousness stuff for the last couple of years. And then you said, oh, by the way, my mom wrote a book about, it's called, I'm going to hold it up, it's called Heaven and Earth. And she wrote it and published it, printed it. It came out in 1994. In my opinion, it was way ahead of its time, at least for me. And it's a very interesting read, and we're going to talk a little bit about it because she was near the end of her life. She was living in Hawaii, and maybe you can give a little background about that in a minute. And Royce is now in possession of hundreds of copies of this book, which I've read, and I was astounded, and I'm recommending. So can you give us just a little bit of background on your mom and how this book got developed?
Certainly. My mom was a nurse practitioner, actually a master's in nursing. I went to the University of Washington and grew up as a child of the 40s and 50s. She was born in 1938. Had a very typical American lifestyle, complete with abusive parents and many of the trials and tribulations that unfortunately befall so many of us. But when I was about 2 years old in 1969, she was overcome by her frantic lifestyle, her workaholic tendencies. She was working at the University of Washington there, teaching nursing, and she collapsed into a coma, which lasted for 2 weeks. After coming back from that coma, obviously I was only 2, but these are legends that were told to me over the years. She tells of having a near-death experience at that time. She went down a tunnel of light. She met or was met by a being, and not a physical being, but a presence that informed her that she was not ready. It was not her time. As much as she felt the warmth and the love and was really drawn to this mode of existence, she was told in no uncertain terms, no, you have work to do. You have gifts to the current planet or the current plane. You have a daughter still on the way, and you need to go back now. So that's the story of her experience, the pivotal moment in her lifetime. After that, she embarked on a slow building process of moving more and more into a spiritual existence as opposed to a physical or a mundane existence. She actually struggled immensely with financial matters and day-to-day life, and her health was never wonderful. She was fairly incapable of dealing with the world as we live in, but she worked with many people. She worked with John Lilly, MD, who did a lot of work with dolphin language, but also with out-of-body experiences in isolation tanks. She worked as an editor with him on several of his books. Went to the Esalen Institute in Central California and was really moved and transformed by what she encountered there. During one of those encounters, she met a man who she conceived a child with, and my sister was born. That was in 1974. I wasn't living with her at that time. I was living with my father, but I met my sister and was at her birth, which was a wonderful thing at a kind of a communal house that she was living in Manhattan Beach, California. Having been born in Seattle, she seemed to migrate towards more and more tropical weather as she progressed in the spiritual path. She wanted to be warmer and more in touch with the climate and the planet. So she went from Seattle to Southern California. When my sister turned 18 and moved out of the house, she felt the freedom then to continue her journey and moved to the island of Kauai, where she found probably the truest expression of her being and her livelihood. She started working with AIDS patients there as a counselor, or just I don't want to say death doula because that was not part of her vernacular, but she helped them transition and come to peace with their passing. And the spiritual aspects of that were really profound for her, as well as the island. It really spoke to her, and the community she found there was so powerful. In a little house on Anini Beach on the north shore of Kauai, sitting by a stream, she sat down at her computer, and this book came through. I was of the impression that she wrote it, but she was under no such hubris. She didn't claim to have created this. She said she channeled it. She became a vehicle for the information to come from source, which were her words, and that's language that she will also use in the book. She brought the information down, and it just laid itself out page by page. The book is written in small page paragraph form. It has a lot of wisdom in it, and reading it cover to cover brings a wonderful sense of her philosophy and her spirituality. But I've also used it in kind of an oracle fashion, where if you think of a question or you have something going on in your life, you can open it and read. All the complexities you work with and that your mind continually creates will only keep you in confusion until you realize its primal truth, that all is unfolding perfectly. Once you realize this and learn to live by it, you may create complexity to your heart's content, for it will all be divine play, and you will be able at any moment to release all the complexity back to its primal source. So I like that the book has many things to offer, not just a foundation in spirituality, but it can be used as a tarot deck or something similar as well.
Let me just unmute myself because I was just enthralled by the conversation that you were offering. When I read this, I have to admit, I was very surprised. At this stage in my life, for the last 3 or 4 years, I have been involved with a lot of metaphysical, spiritual education and search, trying to find consciousness in a way that I never really participated with or worked on for myself up until most recently. I have read things like The Course in Miracles, which is supposed to be a channeled dictation from Jesus Christ. I've read The Way of Mastery, which is an upgraded version of that, and I've read several other sources. this book read like that for me. And when I asked you that question, it sounds like it was channeled. Your response was, an answer was what?
Well, when you asked me that question, I actually got goosebumps because I had given you no indication of that in our previous conversations. I had used the words, my mom wrote a book, and I offered you a copy of it as a Christmas gift and as a spiritual gift to a kindred soul. But I read the email where you said, this sounds like it was channeled, and literal goosebumps, which are back now for what it's worth. I had always been a slightly skeptical. I mean, the wisdom in the book, it speaks for itself, and there's no arguing with it. It's universal truth, absolutely. But the method of bringing it down or putting it on paper, okay, you know, I know she sat down and it came through, and there was no editing and there was no layout, and each page was individual, and it was done in, I don't know how many nights, but it didn't take a lot of work on her part. It was effortless. So when you said it sounded channeled, I personally haven't had experience with those other books that you mentioned, or other channeled things, other than a little bit of something like Braxton Hicks, or there's something like that I was exposed to. Which is a little more theatrical, I think. And it helped me to lend a validity to her claim, to hear you independently come up with that observation.
Well, you know, Royce, your mom is a blessed treasure to us for being so conscious and aware that she could bring some of this information to us. And whether we know the source of her or not, we'll talk. I mean, you say, you claim it to be the source, and, you know, I call it the divine spirit, and other people have other words for that. It's an amazing thing. I'm just gonna read a small section, a couple of small sections, but I'm gonna read one right now. And this is just one page, page 31. It says, the human condition is not one to be merely endured. The human condition is meant to be playful, light, enjoyable, full of discovery, awe, and wonder. As you explore the world of your senses and your creative powers, you are filled with delight and appreciation. These emotions generate further wonders of discovery. As you begin to remember all of these things, your life will take on a new and greater dimension. Life is not meant to be difficult. Struggle and pain is not an inevitable part of living. Please release this erroneous belief. And, you know, recently I was reading about mindfulness, and one of the principles of mindfulness is beginner's mind. Look at everything that you see with the wonderment, as if you were a child, as if you were watching a young person just discovering the environment, the world around them. And even as we look, we take things for granted. We get in our car, we go downtown, whatever it is. We've seen all these things 1,000 times, but each and every one of them, you can find a moment where there's something that you've never noticed, or you can appreciate it in a different way. Or if your heart and spirit and soul are in a certain place, you can ask, why am I drawn to go down this road and to visit these people? Where is the lesson for me? And it can become a wonderful, fun, and joy-filled game as to how even the most mundane things in one's life can be celebrated and looked at in a different way than just the three-dimensional thoughts that we normally have. So I mean, a page like this, every page triggered stuff for me, but a page like that I just read sends me off into a world of self-exploration and wondering, if I know that in just a few moments of my day or my life, how could I find my way to be there 24/7? And I think that's what we're all trying to remember or to become aware of. And so I thank you. It's a blessing that you shared this book, and I can find those kind of things that trigger me in those ways. And maybe it'll encourage people to want to read these words or other channeled words to find the insights that they can have for themselves. Want to respond to anything about I said about the passage I read?
More about your experience than the passage you read. I'm just filled with emotion right now as I hear you expressing what you found and the joy you found in this book. And I'm enveloped in my mother and her spirit and her love right now. She's thrilled. This is why she wrote the book. She wrote the book as a guide, as a way to show the way, to be a guide. Not in her own sense, she was trying to help others, and to even have one person find some joy or find some resonance with the words in the book, it kind of makes the 23-year wait all the worthwhile. She does speak of timing throughout this book and her second book, which never actually made it into publication, but I do have the manuscript, and she speaks of the planet and the time, and during this time of change, and whether she was keyed into something that others were not, or whether we each experience this change at our own pace. And we tend to attract like community or like souls around us as we do this. The fact that you and I met on the other side of the planet is evidence of that. And when she went to Kauai, she was surrounded by people who had a similar spiritual path. I've got some stories there, but it's just, it really does my heart wonderful to hear you finding joy in this. And I hope that other people can too.
Well, if you read this with a beginner's mind and you're open to hearing these words, you're going to find some stuff to hear that you really resonate with. And I agree with you. She kept repeating, or the text repeated over and over again, that we're at the dawning of a new age of consciousness and awareness. And that for every one person, for even just an instant of getting conscious or aware of the divine and how that we are part of it and we're equal to it and we create it. I mean, these are the words that I've heard in this text and other places. If we can raise our awareness and consciousness a little bit, it raises everybody's consciousness, just because we start resonating and vibrating at a slightly higher level. I've heard them say that, but I'm beginning to feel it. I'm beginning to know that myself. So I'm going to read another passage. And I arbitrarily picked this today when I knew we were going to do our interview. This is from page 95. It has 120 some odd pages in the book. On page 95, it reads, "The evolution of consciousness is such that whatever awareness each individual attains is immediately transmitted to and becomes a part of the collective consciousness." I'm going to keep reading, but that's exactly what we were just talking about. "That is why it is essential that all true change begin within. Outer activism will have little effect if it is not coming from a deep inner change of awareness, which is finding expression of the true self in the action. Inner awareness will lead to the right action and outer expression, so that the minimal essential application of energy will have maximum impact. To have peace in the world is essential that individuals find their true inner peace. This inner peace then emanates into and affects the outer world." And as we're talking about this in early 2019, these words, they just ring so true. And this was written 25 years ago. And I ahead of time, I don't know if we believe in time anymore, or I'm struggling because of the stuff that I'm reading in quantum physics and stuff. But regardless of that, for me to read this right now, it just feels like perfect for me right now. And I think that it's not just me. It's me with the big M. It's all of us need to hear about external peace is created through inner peace and awareness. And I'm just going to thank you once again, Royce, for sharing this book with me. And I'm so curious. When you first saw it or got it, I mean, you were a lot younger, and what did you do with it? I mean, what did you think about it when you read these words?
That's an interesting. I don't have a memory of actually reading this book for the first time. I know I did in probably 1994. I actually have signed copy number 3. But it spoke to me of my upbringing. I know my mother. I know her life. I know her spirituality. And this is a distillation of that. She's been living these words for at least the past 20 years prior to the actual creation of this piece of paper. So the words were not surprising to me. And I've also known her to be an articulate person, and to have this created, it was a joy to see it birth, to see her process of transformation and bringing this into the world. It was it's really her legacy. She was in her joy there in Kauai when she wrote this, and she self-published. That's why I have 600 or 700 copies left. She took out a giant loan and actually paid a publishing company to print physical copies of the book, unlike what you can do now, where you just upload a file somewhere and they'll print them on demand. It was more her second book that hit me as something. I didn't read it until after she had passed away. She lived on Kauai from 1991 through 1994. And I never got over there to visit with her. I received a phone call that she had had a heart attack and that I needed to get over there to be by her side. Unfortunately, she passed while I was somewhere over the Pacific Ocean. And, in dealing with her estate and her effects, I discovered and found the second book, which is titled The Dance of Oneness. And it was like I was reading from beyond the grave. It was like she had left a guidebook and a letter for me. A couple hundred pages of, "It's okay, honey. I'm still here. I'm still with you. I'm not going anywhere." Excuse me. That was the most moving and transformative experience. Was reading that. Heaven and Earth speaks about the dualities that we experience in each day, and polar opposites, which are both necessary for any experience to be complete, and how they're not really opposites. We're all part of one creation, one source, and any separation is an illusion. The Dance of Oneness picks up where that leaves off and talks about, okay, well, now you've realized that you have a whole, or that we are a whole. What do we do with that? And it's a fascinating read in its own right. And there's a passage in there that talks about death and the transformation, or the movement to a higher plane. And just reading that, it was very, very incredible and powerful for me.
Wow. Again, thank you for sharing. And I feel the emotion that you experienced then and you're experiencing now in the memory of this legacy of your mom and her work. I have so many questions. We don't have time to cover all of those in this interview. And yet I'm going to, for me, I'm going to an IONS meeting tomorrow. That's the International Association of Near-Death Studies. And they have a lot of people who have either had near-death experiences or they've had spiritually transformative experiences which change their lives in the way that they live and the way that they think. And there's so many that are consistent in their description of the other side of the veil, what happens when we go through our transition. And you saw your mom go through this, being in a coma for 10 days or whatever, and come out a changed person, having probably that near-death experience. Can you speak to that at all about, like what changed for her, or and the difference that you saw before and after that, because it's triggered her finding her way to Kauai in the early 1990s and working on this project. And do you see any correlation, between what was going on in the late 60s when she was sick?
Well, it's difficult for me to speak about before and after. As I mentioned, I was 2 years old at the time of her coma, so I don't have any clear recollections. I didn't know her then. I know anecdotally and through family stories and journals and things like that, I can get a pretty clear picture that she was, plus how she raised me and the kinds of food she fed me. She was a typical material, Christian raised, had, went to church, had a white wedding in a church, got married, had a kid, was living the prescribed or the predictable life. The near-death experience was the crux. And I believe she described that as well, connection with Source. She went through there and really was welcomed. The biggest takeaway she had from that was that she had no fear of death. She would often speak of death, and for a long time I was very resentful because she would say things like, "I'm not going to be here very much longer," or "I'm not going to be around," as if she was predicting her own passage. But she was doing it welcoming and with no fear. And she was also a cigarette smoker for all her life and didn't really take care of her heart. She had a heart condition. But again, she went willingly wherever she went, and did so as a leader and a guide. And she brought this here for us to work with. And it's a fascinating period. Again, time is a relative thing, but for it to be dormant and not really excited. I've had it on Amazon for 10 years now, and I haven't sold a single copy. Yet, every bookstore I've taken it to, it's been well received. And I just don't have the time or the resources to get out and push this and publish this. I have a life and a job and a family and have my own thing. So it's very exciting for me to see your excitement and to see your connections in your community. I'm hopeful that it'll breathe new life in after the near-death experiences.
Well, if people are watching this and they want a copy of it, do you want to give any contact information or tell them how they might be able to get a copy if they're curious? I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, but you do have 600 copies.
I do, and I would love to see them make a difference in the world. I'm not needing financial gain out of it, but to cover my costs, I'll offer copies for $10. That'll include shipping. You can buy them.
Shipping in the U.S.
Yes, worldwide shipping. We would have to make another arrangement. You can reach me via email. My name Royce, ROYCE, at miscreants.org, miscreants.org. Alternately, the book is available on Amazon. You can go there. Strangely enough, my mother put it in many bookstores, and I don't know how, but there are 20 or 30 copies available on Amazon through various bookstores and resellers and things. some as high as $50 or $60. If you do see it there, my Amazon store, it's called Dr. Stan's Eclectic Emporium. And that's my father was Dr. Stan Williams. He left a legacy of other books that I've got listed on Amazon, but many copies of this. It's listed for $6.95 plus whatever shipping Amazon does, but they take a big chunk of that for themselves. I don't make much on that. I'll probably get $1 or $2. So I'd rather you just reach out and email, and I'll mail you a copy.
And while I have the screen, it's Heaven and Earth by Lee, L-E-E Williams. And this is Royce Williams, the son, who's the purveyor of these books at this point. It's amazing, the whole story, the way you tell it, and what I've read so far. I've seen part of the manuscript. I started reading the second manuscript for the second book, and I haven't had the time to really digest and get into it, but I would love to have a follow-up conversation with you, to see how things are going. Maybe do something that is focused more specifically on the people who would really love to see this, which are people from maybe Unity or from IONS or anybody who's studying, the death and dying transition experience, death doulas, and people that are into spiritual growth, consciousness growth, and metaphysical awareness. It's more than just New Age words. This information is, like you said, coming from a source that rings true for me as a kind of a neophyte in trying to translate what I am learning or remembering from the divine source. And thank you so much, Royce, for being available for us.
You're welcome, John, and thank you for taking an interest, for sharing your emotional response to the book and your experience in reading it, and for providing a way to help other people get in touch with these universal truths.
Yeah, will you give your email address just one more time, please?
Yes, it's Royce, R-O-Y-C-E, just like Rolls Royce, at miscreants.org. That's M like Mary, I, S like Sam, C like cat, R, E, A, N like Nancy, T like Tom, S like Sam, .org.
Great. So that's how people can communicate with you, and you're willing to somehow get a $10 payment and ship the book that's included in that price anywhere in the U.S.
Yeah, PayPal or check, or I'm technologically savvy, so we can push money around the planet in many different ways nowadays.
Great. Well, I'm gonna get us to wind down and sign off, Royce, but I don't want to cut you off. Is there anything that you want to share with people who might have paid attention for 30 minutes to us?
Just to offer my love and to say thank you.
And this is John Mason with Masters of the Journey. You can find us at mastersofthejourney.com or Facebook, Masters of the Journey, to see our events and some of the things that we have. We're writing a weekly blog that we can give you access to. And like I said, most of those articles are coming from a channeled source also. So you're a blessing. Thank you for your time and your attention, and we'll get back to you another time. I'm just going to wave goodbye to everybody, and I'm going to